ladies and gentlemen, His Fistic Majesty is gone. Long live His Fistic Majesty. Yes, it's Wednesday morning, and I'm your boy, the Oracle of Pancratia, observer of Fistiana's finest traditions, and host of the Michael Bisping commemorative tea party, Jack Slack. Fight's Gone By, episode 83, I believe, and the big news this week, of course, is that Michael Bisping's retired, but we'll do that in a minute. We'll have a proper memoratum, you googly, for his career. In the meantime, we'll do some news, we'll do some recaps after that, and then we'll do some mail. We got an event this weekend, a UFC event. It's not I don't know, I'm looking down the card and it's fun enough, but it's really sort of fun for the hardcores more than anything else. We'll probably try and get in a second podcast for that, or we'll do an article about one of the fights. You find me cranky as fuck because I'm on the rice, broccoli and chicken. Had a bit of a blowout weekend with the missus, went down to the Cotswolds, that was good fun. Saw a pub called The Fox and Goat, and I started writing a screenplay for a sitcom wherein Vladimir Klitschko and Hayden Panettiere own and run a pub, and Vlad would be behind the bar, all 6'8" of him, and people would go, so why is it called The Fox and Goat? And he'd go, well, one of us is a fox and the other's the goat. And then do the whole, which one am I? Coy look to camera, and then the laugh track would go. Oh, it'd be absolutely fantastic. The projects I have on the back burner, you wouldn't fucking believe. But anyway, that's why I'm being sensible this week, packing all my points into the bland food groups, hitting my bland macros, and I'm trying to keep it under 20 grams of fun. So what's been happening this week? Well, the first thing that happened was that Liverpool UFC card was just plagued by weight issues from I say local fighters, obviously Darren Till isn't local. I'm glad I didn't jump in to shit on him about this because his pregnant girlfriend was in hospital, it turned out later on. Obviously not ideal. There's a degree of understanding that, he had something bad go on and that threw it off, but equally, he's made such a huge deal of the massive amount of weight he cuts. If everything has to go absolutely perfect for you to make your weight cut, it's probably not, you probably shouldn't be cutting that much weight. Because when does everything go perfect? I think he's already missed weight once in the UFC. He missed it by a long way this time, and they had a second day weigh-in, and I think Thompson got 30% of his purse, but it does sort of highlight the issue with being one of these giants in the weight class. And then the other one to miss weight was Molly McCann, who is an actual local fighter, so lots of lead in the water up in Liverpool, which would explain the people. Within 10 seconds of this broadcast, they had mentioned the Beatles, as someone pointed out to me, and then mispronounced the word Scouser. They said he's a Scouser with a Z. He's a Dosser and a Dwad. I've been holding off on my Scouse impression because it turned out that, someone in Till's vicinity was telling me that he had read all my Cerrone pieces in the build-up to that fight. So I was being nice because I had my Scouse accent ready to go, and it is offensively shit. It mainly consists of the Harry Enfield thing, where you wear the fluffy wig and a tracksuit, and you go, "Hey, calm down." So anytime I'm going to do, I'm doing an impression of Darren Till in the coming episode, I will be going back to that because he did miss weight, and that gets it bumped down in boy estimation. Also, the fight wasn't great, but hence there not being an article on it this week. What else happened? Bare Knuckle FC is doing its premiere event on June 2nd, which is obviously in a couple of days' time. I already wrote something about this. Bare Knuckle is always a vague term because most of these places fight with hand wraps, which sort of defeats what Bare Knuckle was. Bare Knuckle was you had to really pick your shots, otherwise you're going to break your hands. If you tape them up so you've got a plaster cast around your hand anyway, all you're really doing is boxing in smaller gloves that are harder. But it's interesting. Things like BKB and this, if it could take off and become its own real sport, it'd be very interesting to see how that goes. Like I said, wrote a long article on it the other week, so go check that out. In other UK MMA news, Cage Warriors lightweight champion Chris Fishgold has signed to the UFC. He's one that most in the UK scene always is bring up if you're talking not local talent, but the talent that we've got coming up in the UK at the moment. So that's good news. And then UFC 227 gets Moicano versus Swanson. That's nice. I can't help but feel, I think I've said this before, but I can't help but feel that's not really a step forward for Moicano in terms of like a challenge. I mean, Swanson could come out and batter him, but like, I feel Moicano's already shown us that he's better than that. Anyway, that'll wrap up our news for this week. Time to talk about the real news story. Michael Bisping, his Fistic Majesty, has retired from professional mixed martial arts. Now, I've had tremendous fun in the last few years triggering Anderson Silva fans by saying that Michael Bisping boxed up Anderson Silva. It's sort of a dual-edged sword because you can trigger Anderson Silva fans that way, but also he did. If you can't watch that fight and realise why Bisping's having success and the fact that Anderson Silva had very rarely fought, well, the other one I can think of is Weidman, someone who actively feinted and jabbed well and played with his sense of anticipation instead of standing still in front of him, as Vitor Belfort did, or Yushin Okami did, and then throwing the exact same punch that they always did, or, exact same pair of punches that they always did, or ran in after him chin first, a la Forrest Griffin, Chris Lieben, Dan Henderson, any number of fighters that he fought, then you are missing the point of fighting altogether. If you can find me a clip of Anderson Silva landing a really good counter on someone who actually was playing with his sense of anticipation with good jabs and good feints, I will be very, very surprised, as someone who has watched his entire fightography several times through. And that will always chap the asses of people who want to pretend that Anderson Silva stopped winning because he stopped being, quote-unquote, in the Matrix. Was Michael Bisping in his prime versus Anderson Silva in his prime? Would that fight have gone down the same way? No, I very much doubt it. Michael Bisping was getting technically better until he just fell off at the end there. I used to hate writing about Michael Bisping because he was just a 1-2, pull your head back, try and slap on the double collar tie, and that was it. He was a tremendously boring fighter. I remember back at Bloody Elbow, I used to write things about him, like before the Jason Miller fight and things like that, and it was just like I felt obliged to, I felt like I had to, and I hated it, and I skipped over his stuff for a very long time. I didn't write anything about the latest fight or most things like that, actually. It was only later on when I went back and realised how much better he'd gotten since working with Perillo and, learning a jab, learning to box. I really changed my mind on him and decided, look, I need to actually start studying this guy. And then he beat Anderson Silva, and then he looked so good in the Rockhold rematch. Finally people are getting over that fluke angle, which is one of the annoying things about this sport. People were pretending that Luke Rockhold was a tremendous boxer, even though he had shown bad boxing over and over again up to the Bisping fight. People based their opinion of fighters' abilities entirely on the result rather than how they fight. We're going to be talking about more about that later with the MVP, I imagine. But, Michael Bisping, he did change a lot through his career, and really by the end, he was a much better fighter than even when he was in his physical prime. Obviously a very sad end. He got beaten by George St. Pierre and then took a ridiculously short notice fight with Kelvin Gastelum for no reason, no personal gain to be had there, aside from, this sort of arrogance that he had to prove to himself he could still do it. And he got badly knocked out in that one. And, it's nice that he's realised so soon that he doesn't have it, or rather that there's no point going on. His best days physically were behind him by the time that he, made the most recent run at the title and won it. But it takes fighters a very long time to realise that they're done, and they will hang on until they finally get a win, and that'll just convince them to hang on longer. Look at Vitor Belfort, look at Lyoto Machida, look at Anderson Silva himself. Anderson Silva's still competitive with a lot of guys, though, but, there's a... Well, I don't need to give you many examples. You can think of hundreds of Diego Sanchez, fucking tons of these guys, because it's basically every good fighter. You can't just gracefully leave. You can't accept, okay, I'm not winning fights anymore. So he said on this podcast this week that he was having eye trouble in his good eye. There's always been like this up in the airness of the condition of his bad eye, because obviously if your eye isn't in great shape, you're going to lie about it anyway. But he did, if you watch the fight with Gastelum, I think he gets cracked on that side hard with the left hand. And it was a left hook that GSP caught him with, and GSP specifically said that Freddie Roach had told him to try and get into the blind spot on that side. One-eyed fighters, dangerous stuff. Joe Frazier did it for years. Harry Greb, once he retired, they found out he'd been fighting with a glass eye for his entire career, and they had a massive crackdown on regulating that in the coming years. Which Custamato apparently, that was the reason that he never got to fight professionally, because he had a messed up eye from a fight when he was a kid. But Joe Frazier famously had one ruined eye and an eye with a cataract in, so he had about 30% vision when he was fighting Muhammad Ali before Ali closed his eyes in the Thriller in Manila. We often speculate on Justin Gaethje's eyesight because he wears massive thick glasses and he fights like someone who isn't trying to see punches coming but rather feel them and react to them. It's a very difficult thing, and as someone who has had to change glasses prescriptions a couple of times and does worry about losing his eyesight eventually, it's scary to think about, but certainly a lot less scary if you're not being punched in the face by people who are being paid to try and knock you out. So what does Michael Bisping leave us with? The amazing performance against Anderson Silva, which really highlighted the shortcomings of Anderson Silva's style generally. If you thought that Anderson Silva was perfect, then, grow up. Nobody's perfect in the fight game. He gave us a performance against Rockhold where in the first fight it made Rockhold look like he was an unstoppable monster, and in the second fight he did really well at taking away the few things that Rockhold is very, very good at, and he made Rockhold look a lot more clumsy, and eventually ended up with him getting countered. Whole heap of performances over jobbers and journeymen. Michael Bisping has a pretty padded record. They kept him at the lower levels. They kept him on headlining UK cards against like Chris Lieben. Really not a whole lot of top 5 wins. The difference between him and Gegard Mousasi basically is the wins over Silva and Rockhold. Aside from that, he's pretty much Mousasi, just sort of a guy who's good enough to be elite but not good enough to beat the elite of the elite. But we'll be talking about Mousasi later. Anyway, thank you, Michael Bisping, you hilarious bastard. It wasn't fun covering your fights when you were just 1-2 and lean back. It became a lot more fun covering your fights as you worked with Perillo and got much better. Right, let's talk about these fights we had at the weekend. Let's do the UFC one first. What did we have going down on this? Elias beat Trevor Smith. Molly McCann came in overweight and then lost. What was interesting, though? Tom Breeze smashed Dan Kelly, which was sad, but also nice because Tom Breeze is supposed to be, or was supposed to be, the up-and-coming star. Claudio Silva did an awesome comeback job against Nordine Taleb. I mean, this is also Claudio Silva's career comeback. We looked at him last week and we said, oh my God, he hasn't fought since 2014. Taleb was basically in control this entire fight. Claudio was just awful on the feet. And then suddenly, Silva has him on the mat, flattened out, and is rear naked choking him. Apparently, Nordine Taleb had got in his face after the fight in the hotel. Sounds like a bit of a douche, but, plenty of fighters are. Apparently, Nordine Taleb said to him, 10 out of 10 times I beat you, except obviously the one time they did fight. I could totally see why he'd be so frustrated, though, because he was in control that entire fight. Marquand Amirkhani versus Jason Knight. I think they gave this fight of the night. I was meh on it. The stand-up was very mediocre. It was just two guys jabbing and leaning and not really showing much else. There were a couple of really nice takedowns. Amirkhani got some nice takedowns. Otherwise, bleh. Now, we'll talk about Mads Burnell in a minute because I love this kid, but we'll go Neil Magny versus Craig White first. This really just, someone said there are levels to this shit in response to this fight, and it really does just highlight how good. Neil Magny is a sort of middle of the top end kind of welterweight. You're not ranking him in your top 5, maybe your top 10, if depending on where he is in a sort of cycle. He'll beat a couple of good guys, lose to a good guy, beat a couple of good guys, lose to a good guy. One of those fighters, but he was just streaks ahead of Craig White, and he smashed him really easily and leisurely. It looked like he was just sort of in the clinch, and he was like, I'll knee him in the head now, and he did, and that was it. But yeah, fair play to Neil Magny, fair play to Craig White for taking the fight on short notice, and Jorge Masvidal is still talking shit about both Darren Till and Neil Magny. And you're just like, you were given the chance to step in on short notice, and when you do fight, all you do is sit back and complain that you're not being hit. Like, nah, you're not hitting me, mate. And then you complain when you lose the decision. Oh, no, Masvidal is a very frustrating fighter, especially when you saw him against Donald Cerrone when he fought so out of character and so well. But we're not talking about Jorge Masvidal. We've given him too much publicity for his silly call-outs already. Darren Till versus Stephen Thompson obviously didn't turn out as quite the crackerjack banger that we all hoped for. Darren Till did pressure Thompson to the fence, quite a lot throughout the bout, but didn't really do much with it. Spare a couple of good left hands. Really what you saw in this fight was Darren Till struggling with Thompson leaving out towards his right along the fence and just sort of mitigating pressure that way. And this is something that Conor McGregor had too. If you are quite a side-on fighter, a southpaw, very side-on, working with your left hand, like to pressure guys towards the fence, either counter or lead with your left hand along there, you have that problem whereby if they get past your lead shoulder, you don't really have a weapon that side. So Conor McGregor used a lot of wheel kicks for that reason and back kicks to the body. Darren Till used a spinning back fist in like the first round. I think he went for it again, but like a lot, you'd need to be able to pull back that right hand and hook to where the opponent's moving to offer them some problems over there, or just square up a bit more when you're along the fence, if that's really what you want to do and there being a problem in that direction. A couple of nice low-line side kicks from Till. I expected those from Thompson. Thompson has always seemed quite reluctant to use the low-line sidekick. He seems like one of those guys who can do the sidekick really well with his lead leg, but has been brought up on or that will devastate someone's life if you sidekick them in the knee. So he doesn't seem very keen to do it. Stephen Thompson landed those 1-2 flurries or 2-2 flurries or whatever you want to call them. The little karate 2-2s or 1-2s, and doing that by drawing Till forward, jumping in and then leaping out of the way. Not like boxing in the boxing sense, but good boxing in the old style sense, in that you're getting in, landing straight punches and getting out relatively unharmed. Lots to talk about hometown decision, but really, it was close enough that you can't really be upset. And then people being like, 3 English judges on an English card, this is outrageous. And then bringing up the Bisping Hamill one, which I felt Hamill deserved to win, but that one, it was the American judges who scored it for Hamill, and the the American judges who scored it for Bisping, and the one English judge who scored it for Hamill. Truth is, judges just suck the world over, but this is a fight that was close enough that you can't really be mad. And then Arnold Allen versus Mads Bennell. Mads Bennell looked awesome in this fight. He's doing a lot of folding behind his elbows, which is like a one-armed cross guard. A lot of cross guarding with the hands the right way round. A lot of pressuring in off it. A lot of getting in, deflecting punches on his elbows and then coming in. Using inside rights, so turning himself, slipping off to the left side so that his right straight sneaks down the centre. He looked really good. He looked like, if he were black, they'd be saying that he knows the 52. But he isn't, so he knows an old Danish martial art that I believe he learned from Gustav Adolphus or Adolphus Gustavus, whichever one is correct. I can't remember. My 30 Years War stuff is rusty. It's been years. Anyway, he looked really good. I liked what he was doing. His striking into takedowns of this fight was really nice. The use of the inside right. I mean, I wanted to write an article on it, but who the fuck's going to read that? Well, you will, but you're part of a small listenership who like this shit. We like to aim our articles at people who are going to share it with their friends and be like, oh my god, and people who are just going to get angry over titles and come in and read it anyway. But yeah, Mads Bennell looked great, and then he dived into a guillotine, and Arnold Allen got the win. So kind of mixed feelings, but I do like that people were coming to me afterwards, not saying like, "Oh my god, did you see Arnold Allen?" People were saying Mads Bennell looked really good. Shame about getting caught in that guillotine, which is how I felt watching it. So yeah, he's one to keep an eye on. He's sort of got that feeling like KJ Noons, Ross Pearson, all those guys who are sort of my boys because they do unusual things on the feet. And you're like, if you put that on a fighter with better skills in other areas, that would be just murdering people. But yeah, I don't know if he'll be able to round out his game in time, but he's looking good. And then Bellator 200, what do we care about on that card? I thought Phil Davis versus Linton Vassell was actually a pretty good fight. I thought Vassell looked great. Even though he ended up getting knocked out by head kick, I thought he did a good job of trying to stop takedowns. He even took Phil Davis down at a couple of points. He's coming along. He's fallen to 19-7 off this fight, but equally he's training with good fighters and he's competing against good fighters. And Phil Davis is undisputedly like top 10 in the world. So good on Linton Vassell for putting up a good fight. Phil Davis's striking actually looked really good in this fight, but Phil Davis is like Ryan Bader in this respect. You know, if he's confident, then he's looking really good. But if he doesn't have that confidence, he just looks awful. There's no middle ground. He either thinks that he can beat you and then just looks great on the feet, or he doesn't think he can beat you completely and just has nothing on the feet. Charlie Ward flopped all over Marlon Hudson, and then got up and got in his face afterwards, screamed at him on the ground. I mean, Charlie Ward is a useless sack of meat. And when he fell on top of this guy and was just flubbing around for the finish, he just looked... It reminded me of when he flopped over the top of the fence to get out to Conor when Conor had been locked out of the cage at that stupid thing in his last fight. And he just looked like he was a calf being born, just covered in sweat, and then flopping all over the place and standing up. And very poorly coordinated fighter. Bit of a useless sack of meat, but why are we even giving him coverage? Michael Page versus Dave Rickles. This has been one where, in the aftermath, people have revised Rickles like he wasn't just a gimme. He was a lightweight, and he did nothing with Michael Page being on the fence the entire time. Didn't attempt to take down, didn't attempt to clinch, didn't even really attempt to strike him. Just exactly what you expected from this fight, unless you were a moron. And to be honest, the only people who are looking at Michael Page now and being like, oh my god, he just keeps looking better and better when he's fighting exactly the same level of competition or worse each fight, are morons, to be honest. You can only judge a fighter and their style by what it looks like against competent opposition. If you just beat the same level of opposition over and over again without ever moving up when there is so much above you, nobody ever knows what your skill set is like in the greater scheme of things. And in the main event, Mousasi rolled all over Carvalho because of course he did. And then afterwards he was like, I'll fight Rory Mack. And Rory Mack was like, I'll fight him because that's what always happens. And then as always, Scott Coker came in and said, no. Exactly as he did with the Ben Askren fight. Just Scott Coker being Scott Coker. For the next Bellator event, I will be betting on all of the name fighters and in a parlay, and we'll see just how well I do, because typically Scott Coker cards, he'll have all his chosen fighters on the left-hand column and then they will win all the way down. He should be guaranteed money, and I've never used it before, so we'll see how that goes, the experiment going forwards. But anyway, not a tremendous weekend of fights, a couple of good ones, but sort of off-season, to be honest. I know that the Bellator event got less than 500,000 viewers. I don't know how many the UFC have got. I'll have to check it. I would be very interested to know how many people turned off during the main event when they realised that it wasn't going to be what they hoped for. Anyway, let's do some mail and then we'll get out of here for this episode. Dear Jack, the Cecil Mack of the Scrap Pack. I'm mainly an MMA/grappling enthusiast, but recently I've been getting into watching highlights of boxers, especially from 1950 and earlier. One thing that I've noticed is how these boxers throw their rear hand and how it's different from many MMA fighters/kickboxers' punching style, where the latter tend to plant their back foot and turn their hips over to shoot the right hand in a straight line from where it is in their guard. I'm thinking of Krokop for an example of this, so that'd be left hand. The former, Joe Louis for instance, seem to use a completely different motion, squaring up in their stance, winding their right hand behind them, flaring their elbow, and throwing it on a downward arc as if they were throwing a baseball, which apparently Lewis talks about in his book, letting the rear foot leave the ground and drive forward. Is one of these ways of throwing better/more powerful/faster/riskier than the other? Do they serve different purposes? Is this difference due to the different stances used in different sports, or just the style differences? Brackets karate, Muay Thai backgrounds versus boxing backgrounds. Thanks and keep up the great podcasting from Henry. We get into like pyramid footwork and sort of Muay Thai and karate footwork and things here, but Well, firstly, let's talk about the straight. The straight right hand, and this links back to Mads Burnell quite nicely. The straight right hand, if you are in a boxing setup where you and your opponent have your sort of lead shoulder, you're on a line almost against each other, and the jab is the one that's going to get straight to the opponent. The lead shoulder of the opponent should be obstructing the line of your right hand and vice versa, in like a classical boxing matchup between two guys who really know what they're doing. Some fighters fight squarer, some fighters fight very, very side-on, but if you're a pretty standard technical boxer, that'll be the case. So the right straight generally isn't going to get to the mark without running into something first. It's very easy to get the lead shoulder in front of the right hand if you just throw it straight. So a lot of fighters like Lewis, Lewis calls the specifically differentiates the right straight and the cross in his book, and the cross comes across a la the cross counter, and it arcs over the top, and that was Lewis's best punch, almost like he almost had his like vertical fist hook sort of thing. To line up a straight right, you might have to do what Edwin Hazlitt called the inside right. You saw Roy Jones did it a lot, and Mads Burnell here, where you turn your hips first and then you throw the right hand, so that you're getting yourself on that angle slightly by slipping off to the left side and then shooting the right hand down the middle, or you're stepping off to the right side. So like jab, hook, and as you hook, you step out to your left so that you're lining up the right straight down the center where the line of the jab would have been before you stepped. Good example of that historically, Ingemar Johansson, his first knockdown on Floyd Patterson, I believe. But there's loads of examples of that one. Mark Hunt lands the left hook while sort of stepping in and off to his left and lining up the short right hand constantly. Knocked down Bigfoot Silva with it in their second fight, I believe. They had a second fight, yeah. Oh no, well, whichever fight it was, he knocked him down with it. Gets lots of dudes with it. But it's lining up that right hand straight down the center. Footwork, it's always interesting to talk about because classical boxing footwork, a lot of coaches, it's left foot on the left jab and then right foot comes up on the right straight. If you come from like a karate background, or Dutch kickboxing comes from a Kyokushin sort of background, and things like that, a lot of guys will, as you say, plant their feet to throw the right hand. And that is that's one way to get a lot of power on your right hand, because you're moving from your back leg to your front leg. And particularly in things like karate, where you practice hundreds and hundreds of reverse punches, moving your hips to get the most weight possible in them, that's a great way to go. If you watch Rocky Marciano land the Susie Q on Jersey Joe Walcott along the ropes, he steps in with his left foot and then transfers his weight to throw his right hand. He doesn't bring his right foot up until after he's thrown the punch, or after the punch has landed, rather. But equally, guys like Joe Louis and Sugar Ray Robinson, and there's been loads of others, but they consciously throw the jab, and on the right hand they step the right foot in, and that's to make ground a lot of time. Some guys call it pyramid footwork, various other things, but firstly, it helps to make ground. If you jab and then you throw the right hand and then you need to jab again, you're in position where you can already push off your right foot from your stance and do it again. But also it allows you to set up hooks and things like that a lot easier with your left hand. So think of like if you throw your jab and your right straight, but you stay in your stance, your left hook is a shorter punch. So unless they stand there or step in afterwards, your left hook isn't like ideal to land with. But if you watch someone like Gerald McLennan's a great example. He had a wicked left hook to the body, well, like left hook, left uppercut to the body. He had very long reach, but his left hook / left uppercut to the body was shorter than his long right straight. But he used to land it off his long right straight, even on opponents who were moving backwards. And the way he did it was that on his right straight, his right foot would step in, and then he'd step in again with his left foot for the left uppercut or hook to the ribs. And if they stand still, you step your right foot up and you just dig it in anyway. You don't need to step and follow. But if you watch Gerald McLennan's like body shot knockouts, a lot of the time it's that right hand stepping with the right foot at the same time, setting him in position to land the left hook to the body. It's different strokes, different folks, or other way around, whichever is the correct expression. But there are advantages to both, and it's one of those things where learning to do both equally well is going to be very hard to do. You're better off just sticking to doing the one that you're comfortable with. in like karate styles or karate influence styles, it'll be like jab and both feet move, and then you throw the right hand stepping forward with the left foot and both feet move. If you're boxing in a very classical like 1950s style, it might be like jab, left foot moves, right hand, right foot moves. There's all sorts of, like, I heard the Cubans did a weird setup a while ago. People were telling me about their weird shuffling 1-2s that they were taught over in Cuba. But there's always going to be infinite nuance. You can add and take away things everywhere. But as long as you know what the real benefit of doing each is, you can decide when you want to use it and if you even want to bother learning to use it. Cheers, Henry. Hello, Mr. Slack. Love your podcast. Keep it up. Last time you talked about the old southpaw double attack and that it is all about athleticism, but doesn't the orthodox fighter also have the same attack vectors? Or... That's a very good word that we have never used on here before. Or is he not used to the attacks of the southpaw and the southpaw is quick? And if the southpaw is quick, he has the advantage. Hope this makes sense. Why don't fighters more often fake the takedown and then go to the uppercut or the knee? Brackets Maya ? Thanks, from Peter. Okay, so 2 questions there. Yes, southpaw... a southpaw double attack is exactly the same mirrored for an orthodox fighter fighting a southpaw fighter. The southpaw advantage, it shouldn't exist at the highest levels, because at the highest levels, guys should be sparring with good southpaws fairly regularly. But the southpaw advantage is still that you're the oddity. Most of the time, 90% of people that person has sparred or fought up to you should be orthodox, based on just like how many people are left-handed naturally. Obviously, it's changed around because lots of people choose to go southpaw now, and lots of people switch to go orthodox. But if you just went on raw numbers vaguely there, you should have met more orthodox fighters through your amateur career, through your training, through your sparring, through your professional career up to whenever you meet the southpaw. Whereas the southpaw has met an awful lot of orthodox fighters. Typically, if you're the southpaw and you're meeting an orthodox fighter in a professional match or whatever, you're the one doing the thing that you've always done. They're the one doing the thing that they don't always have to do. Whereas if you're both southpaws, you both have to change what you're doing. You're both dealing with something unusual, which gets really interesting, like Manny Pacquiao versus David Diaz. Completely different Manny Pacquiao to most of his other fights. So that's how that works. You are open for exactly the same stuff. It's just that you are much more likely to have been working against orthodox opponents, and so is he. So if he's a southpaw, he's got the edge there in experience, or should have. And then why don't more fighters fake the takedown into the uppercut or the knee? I think a lot of fighters just aren't comfortable. It's going back to that Phil Davis, Ryan Bader thing. If you're not comfortable boxing into a level change in boxing and wrestling for MMA should basically be the same. You're not slamming your lead knee into the mat unless you're really going for a long shot. BJ Penn was really good at this, where your jab and duck or whatever, your duck to get under punches is exactly the same as your duck to get in on their hips. And if you can do that, then your takedowns and coming up with counter punches become indistinguishable, and you're very, very dangerous. If you are diving wildly after takedowns and scared to even get into boxing range, it's a lot harder to convince people, with your level change uppercut, because you actually have to be close enough to throw the uppercut to do it. If you're just diving on takedown attempts from way out of range and failing, you are never going to convince someone, or you're never going to be close enough to uppercut them or hit them with a knee afterwards. It's very tricky. It'll get better as guys get better boxing and things like that. It won't. The guys diving on the long shots, Chael Sonnen style, probably aren't going to be the guys who become good with the Chad Mendes or Justin Gaethje uppercut, because they're comfortable being in range, they're comfortable being hit. Chad Mendes isn't the best inside fighter in the world, but Justin Gaethje is very comfortable there. But they both do well because they are in on top of their opponent, and there's so much less time to react to their shot, so it gets a lot more real. If you're diving from halfway across the ring like Kevin Randleman or something, there's a lot of time to realise this is just a shot. Cheers, Peter. Hi Jack, fellow Brit here. Do you have any book recommendations for learning about grappling and MMA from scratch? Kind regards, Jack. Yeah, if you want to learn more about the way it works and why it works. I mean, a good place to start is the book that Henzo Gracie wrote with John Danaher way back in the day. Don't get excited because it's John Danaher. I mean, it's a really basic book, but probably one that we should all have on our shelves. I don't actually. I've got it on my computer. I should probably get a physical copy of it just for posterity. In terms of, learning grappling, definitely go and join a grappling class because it's the most fun you can have in lycra shorts. But the sort of primer on jiu-jitsu technique is Jiu-Jitsu University. There's not a week that goes by where I don't get frustrated by something and then I go, did Saulo say anything about that? And then I go check the book and there is something in there about that. And I go, oh, okay, cool. Well, that's something to work on. It's a great book for just, I revisit the, I'm a guy with like 10 years of experience in this now, but I revisit the survival section all the time just because it's such a useful thing to remember and focus on. In terms of gimmicky shit, I suppose, Neil Melanson's book on triangles is phenomenal. If you're good at triangles, you want to get good at triangles. I'm not good at triangles, but I do love Neil Melanson's stuff, so that book I carry around with me a lot of the time when I go travelling anywhere. And BJ Penn's Mixed Martial Arts Book of Knowledge isn't bad from like a sort of a simple overview standpoint, with some interesting techniques thrown in because it's BJ Penn. Cheers, Jack. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today's episode. If you want to get in on the Barney Ross lecture, which is coming out in a couple of days, and learn all about Jewish traditions and heritage, because I've had to, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to know what I've been up to at any time, or if you're worried you've missed an article or missed a podcast, or you just need a new homepage whereby you can check what your favourite boy's up to each day, check out thefightprimer.com. Don't buy Notorious just yet because we're about to head into another print run and it's got a ton more stuff in it. And send your emails and questions to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Hail Bisping, the once and future king.